My name is Jennifer Wallace. I'm 40 years old, and the sound of my father's laughter still echoes in that hospital hallway. He wasn't laughing from joy. He was laughing at me. Jennifer's just my unemployed daughter, he told the doctors, loud enough for the nurses to hear. She lives in a fantasy world. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Mom lay in her bed, recovering from her third heart attack. And there I stood. Jeans, gray sweater, worn sneakers. The daughter he never took seriously. Dad owned 3 car dealerships across Nevada. 200 employees. Money, influence, power. He never let anyone forget it. But me? I was the family joke. The child who never grew up. The soldier who, in his words, only played dress-up. I didn't argue. Didn't defend myself. I just held my breath as the room swallowed the lie. Because correcting him never mattered. He had spent 15 years rewriting who I was, until even strangers believed his version. What no one in that room knew was that the unemployed daughter standing in the corner was a colonel in U.S. military intelligence, trusted to brief generals, senators, even the Secretary of Defense. But to my father, I was still the little girl who disappointed him once, and never climbed back. And it wasn't the first time my father erased me. It was a pattern 15 years in the making. It didn't start in that hospital hallway. It started years earlier. Every holiday, every family gathering, every time I tried to share a piece of my life. "How's work, Jenny?" Melissa would ask at Christmas. And when I mentioned deployments or training, Dad would cut in with a news story about a dealership expansion. When I said I couldn't make Easter dinner because of a classified operation, he rolled his eyes. More Army games, I suppose. The words piled up, small cuts that left scars no one could see. When I made sergeant at 22, he told relatives I was still figuring things out. When I entered officer candidate school, he called it finally growing up, maybe. When I pinned on captain, he told people I was still in the Army, still wasting time. By the time I became a major, he stopped mentioning me altogether. At family reunions, Marcus was the lawyer, Melissa was the doctor, and I was just Jennifer. Still in uniform, still, apparently, playing dress-up. The truth was so much heavier. I'd spent years in Afghanistan analyzing terrorist networks. I'd trained Iraqi security forces in cities most Americans had never heard of. I ran counterintelligence operations across the Middle East. By 35, I was in the Pentagon, coordinating intelligence with CIA station chiefs and NATO allies. At 39, I wore a colonel's eagle. But to my family, I was invisible. Or worse, a child too lost in her own imagination to hold a real job. And the more I accomplished, the smaller he made me feel. The dismissal wasn't ignorance anymore. It was willful. It was rewriting my life out loud until even strangers believed him. And when strangers look at you with pity, as if you're a grown woman playing make-believe, the lie cuts deeper than the truth ever could. But the higher I rose, the harsher the fall when the truth finally broke through. For years I lived 2 lives. In one, I wore civilian clothes at family dinners, listened while Marcus dissected case law, and Melissa explained new medical studies. I smiled, nodded, pretending my days weren't filled with classified briefings that shaped national security. In the other life, the one they refused to see, I walked the halls of the Pentagon. I read cables stamped top secret. I prepared analysis that reached the president's desk. But to my family, I was still unemployed Jennifer, the daughter who never grew up. I sent photos from ceremonies once, me in dress blues, taking command of a battalion. Dad smirked. "Nice costume party, kiddo." I stopped trying after that. At the hospital, the dismissal only grew. Mom needed round-the-clock care, so we took shifts. Marcus read medical journals. Melissa argued treatment options. And Dad, always the salesman, spoke like his authority outweighed mine. "Jennifer's free all the time," he told the staff. "She doesn't have a real job." They nodded politely. I stayed silent while encrypted messages buzzed on my phone. From Langley CENTCOM field officers overseas. One night as I sat beside Mom's bed, my phone vibrated with a priority alert. Coel Wallace, SecDef wants Syria brief at 0800. PDB prep at 1400. My pulse quickened. The Secretary of Defense. The President's daily brief. Decisions that could shape wars. I slipped the phone away. But Dad noticed. "For Christ's sake, Jennifer," he barked. "Your mother's dying and you're playing games?" Heads turned. Marcus frowned. Melissa shook her head. Even the nurse pitied me. I wanted to explain. But after 15 years of trying, what was the point? So I kissed Mom's forehead and whispered, "I have to go." Dad scoffed. "Of course you do. Run away again. Here's the truth." The next morning, while they pictured me unemployed, I was seated 20 feet from the Secretary of Defense, briefing him on Syria. When the meeting ended, My phone showed 17 missed calls. Dad's voicemails weren't just angry, they were panicking, because someone else had told him who I really was. And when the truth finally walked into that hospital, no one could unsee it. The 17 missed calls weren't all the same. The first few were angry, the next few desperate. And the last one? His voice cracked in a way I'd never heard before. Jennifer, something happened at the hospital. I need you to call me back. When I finally did, Dad answered on the first ring. His words tumbled out fast, shaky. A man came here, in uniform. Said he was looking for Colonel Wallace. I told him there was no colonel here, just my daughter. But then he showed me a picture of you. I closed my eyes, felt the weight settle in my chest. Standard protocol. When a senior officer missed scheduled communications, a team checked in person. Dad's voice dropped to a whisper. He called you ma'am, and then he saluted the photo. Silence stretched between us. For 15 years he'd mocked me, dismissed me, erased me. And now, in one gesture from a stranger, his entire story collapsed. Jennifer, are you really a colonel? The question broke me more than his laughter ever had. Yes, Dad, I am. I heard him inhale sharply, like reality had punched the air from his lungs. The nurse looked you up, he said slowly. She showed me articles, pictures. There's one of you shaking hands with General Milley. I remembered that day, briefing the Joint Chiefs, the weight of decisions hanging heavy in the room. But all Dad saw now was proof he could no longer deny. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. And for the first time in my life, he sounded small. I tried, I whispered. For 15 years I tried. I was sitting in a secure conference room at the Pentagon, surrounded by classified documents, tears streaking down my face. Not because I was weak, because the man who had erased me for decades was finally seeing me, and I didn't know how to carry that. 2 days later, I walked back into Mom's hospital room. But this time I didn't hide. I wore my dress blue uniform. Colonel's eagles gleaming, rows of ribbons catching the light. 15 years of service, distilled into cloth and metal. Dad looked up, and for the first time since I was 8 years old, he didn't laugh. He stood, eyes locked on me, mouth open but no words, because there was no joke left to tell. From that moment on, the story was no longer his to tell. It was mine. Walking back into that hospital room in full uniform wasn't about pride. It was about truth. For years, I'd folded myself smaller, wearing jeans and sweaters so they wouldn't roll their eyes. But now the cloth on my shoulders spoke louder than any words I could give them. Dad stood as soon as he saw me. His eyes tracked every ribbon, every badge. The combat patch from Afghanistan. The defense medal from my Pentagon years. The parachutist wings I'd earned at 22. Each piece was a story he had ignored. Now it was written in a language he couldn't laugh away. Jenny, he whispered. And for once, the word wasn't condescending. It was reverent. He glanced toward Mom. She stirred, opened her eyes just enough to smile. There's my general, she breathed. The room fell silent. Marcus set down his medical journal. Melissa froze with the IV line still in her hand. For the first time, my siblings didn't see me as detached. They saw me as someone they didn't recognize, and maybe never really knew. Dad took a step closer. I called your commanding officer, he admitted, voice trembling. I wanted to apologize for everything. For not believing you. For being a terrible father. I felt my throat tighten. I'd waited 15 years for these words. But hearing them out loud was almost unbearable. He kept going. He told me about your deployments. About the intelligence you provided that saved lives. He even said you're being considered for brigadier general. That was classified. But I didn't correct him. Sometimes letting hope stand is kinder than the truth. Dad swallowed hard, his voice regaining strength. I'm proud of you, Jennifer. And then, he did something he hadn't done since I was 8 years old. He saluted me. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't practiced. But it was real. For a moment, all the years of laughter, dismissal, and silence collapsed into that one uncertain gesture. And I realized, this wasn't about winning his approval. It was about reclaiming my story, in front of the very people who had erased it. And yet the salute wasn't the ending. It was only the beginning. Dad's salute should have been the final chapter. But life doesn't tie bows that neatly. In the weeks after, he changed. The man who once mocked me started telling anyone who would listen that his daughter briefed generals and senators. It was embarrassing sometimes. But after years of invisibility, being overvisible felt almost like healing. Marcus began asking about intelligence law. Melissa wanted to know about combat medicine. They were trying, in their own ways, to reach into the world I'd built without them. But the truth? The real victory wasn't their respect. It was knowing I had built a life that mattered. While they weren't watching, I had earned my eagles. Earned my seat in rooms where decisions shaped nations. Earned the right to stand without apology. And I did it without their belief, without their applause, without their permission. I did it because an 8-year-old girl once believed she could run the world, and she refused to let anyone laugh that dream away. Now, when I walk into a room, I don't think about who doubts me. I think about who needs me. The young women in uniform who wonder if they'll ever be seen. The daughters carrying invisible battles no one else believes are real. To them I say, you are not the joke. You are not the afterthought. You are the proof that strength doesn't need permission. Because family isn't who defines you. It's who respects you. And respect begins the moment you stop waiting for someone else to give it. Do you believe forgiveness requires reconnection? Or can healing live quietly in your own growth? Wherever you're watching from, morning coffee or late night quiet, I'd like to hear your story in the comments. And if this one stayed with you, subscribe to join a community that believes strength isn't silence. It's knowing when to speak.